Do you have too many dinosaurs to paint and modify? And no motivation to do it? Fret not, there's an answer.
Coffee! Grind it to a fine powder! That's the stuff! Grab a glass! Scoop the cheese! Hot water! Press it harder! So messy! Steam! So tasty! Knife! Robot arm! Now tired. Sleep.
And now, the thrilling conclusion. I was hoping to do this a lot sooner, but I had some other projects, some of which were on YouTube and some of which weren't, that kind of took priority. But we're here now. So believe it or not, there's a Baryonyx in Jurassic World Dominion. But it's a little different than the previous Baryonyx in Jurassic World. This one has a blind eye and a prosthetic arm. We can get a better look at it in the Dinosaur Style Guide from Paleo Publications. So this Baryonyx is actually a juvenile, but Mattel didn't make a juvenile Baryonyx, so we have to work with what we've got. The first thing we've got to do is design that prosthetic arm. I used Nomad Sculpt for that, because that's what I use, and then 3D printed it. And voila, hard part's done. Now we just need to put it on a Baryonyx. I was pretty heavily caffeinated in part 1 and didn't really explain what I was doing. So the long and the short of it is you can't put a prosthetic arm on a Baryonyx if it still has its original arm. So we're just going to Brooklyn this Baryonyx, and by that I mean amputate its arm, not give it a bad haircut. Once that's done, I'm just going to use a X-Acto knife and taper that stump a little bit so it'll fit inside of the prosthetic arm that we 3D printed. Taking care not to sever any of my digits in the process. And voila, like a glove. It does fit pretty well, but we want to make sure there's no space left in there, so we're going to mix up some milliput. Although filling in the gaps in the prosthetic arm to the actual stump isn't the only thing we're going to use the milliput for. The Black Market Baryonyx also has some leather straps holding the prosthetic arm on, as well as a collar. So we're going to go ahead and sculpt those from milliput as well. But first things first, we're going to secure this arm on with some super glue. Excellent. Now to make those straps, I'm going to roll a bit of milliput flat. And once I have an appropriate length of flat milliput, I'll just turn that around and cut the straps out with a knife. Which would have worked just as well with a dull butter knife, but X-Acto knife's pretty much all I've got on hand. And now we're going to make a buckle for that collar using pretty much the same process. Milliput is pretty easy to work with stuff, and you can sculpt in the details with a wetted toothpick, which is exactly what I'm doing here. Once I have that buckle sculpted in, I'm going to go ahead and use that same toothpick and put some stitching on this collar to make it look more like a heavy-duty leather collar, and less like some epoxy putty. It occurs to me I might have missed the bus with this project. Dominion did come out a few years ago, and with Season 2 of Chaos Theory, I know that acoustic Baryonyx is all the rage, but I started this, so I'm gonna finish it. Now that the collar is done, it's time to work on that over-the-shoulder prosthetic holder. And we'll use pretty much the same process that we did for the collar for that. Roll it, cut it, sculpt it. I wetted the flat side of the X-Acto knife, and that's why the blade isn't sticking to the milliput, by the way, just in case you were wondering. Because the arm is articulated, I'm not going to actually make the strap go all the way down to the prosthetic, and I'm going to cut it off right where it meets the joint. But that's fine, it'll all work out. Now I'm using the toothpick to add the stitching, just like I did with the collar. It's tedious, but necessary. And now we just wait 24 hours for it to cure completely, although it ended up being more like a month. And now we'll just base coat it in a combination of warm buff and golden sunset, which, as it just so happens, works great for dinosaur teeth as well as base coating baryonyx. Alright, looks like this base coating is nearly done. Wait, what? It's a lopsided dinosaur! We better base coat the other side. Stand by while I remedy this egregious error. Alright, now that that base coat's done, we can do some dry brushing. We're going to use a combination of Tuscan Teal, Arbor Green, and Pavement. And that, my friends, is the recipe for Baryonyx Blue, which is much more of a bluish, greenish, grayish. But Baryonyx Blue has more of a ring to it. And we're just going to use that color to dry brush along the back and the top of the head as well as the fronts of the legs, which consequently are the parts of the baryonyx with the most scaly texture. And this dry brushing is really going to help those textures pop. But when have I ever just dry brushed a dinosaur and called it a day? Nope, it's time to bust out our secret weapon, our handy dandy trusty toothpick. And using that same baryonyx blue color, we're going to do a series of dots and speckles. I know, who saw that coming, right? So as we paint these speckles, we're going to have a much higher density of speckles closer to all of the dry brushing that we just did. As we get further away from the dry brushing, we'll have a lower density of speckles, and they'll also be smaller in size. And it's going to have a nice crocodile-y effect. So bear with me, this part does take a little bit of patience. Particularly since we are going to continue this speckled pattern all the way to the tip of the tail, because unlike some multi-billion-dollar toy companies, we don't skimp on paint here. Although with that said, I'm kind of grateful they do skimp on paint, because that helps me to do what I do. If there were no improvements to make on these figures, this channel, sadly, wouldn't exist. And I'd be out a hobby. Fortunately, that is not the case, and there is lots of improvement to make. And so we carry on with the speckles. Speckle, speckle, speckle. Not to be confused with spackle, which is better used for drywall. Please enjoy the speckling, and I will catch you in the next step.
Speckle, speckle, speckle. Speckle.
Just when I thought I was done speckling,
It never ends.
Okay, now that that's done, we are going to take our thoroughly speckled baryonyx and airbrush a little bit of country gray lightly over those speckles. We need to be careful here not to completely obscure those speckles, or all that work we just did is all for naught. We just want to fade them a little bit. Mission accomplished. Now, we're going to airbrush some of that baryonyx blue over our previous dry brushing. The same rule applies here though. We just want to lightly airbrush over the dry brushing. If we completely obscure the effect of the dry brush, then what was the point to begin with? We just want to add a little bit more color to it, and tie in those speckles a little. Now that that's done, I think it's time to move on to the claws. I'm painting these with a combination of chestnut, pavement, and jet black. They mostly just look black, but there is a hint of brown in there. Don't forget that dew claw. Now for the mouth. And for the mouth, I'm going to use my favorite dinosaur mouth color, metallic red mixed with classic caramel. Of course, no mouth is complete without the teeth being painted as well. For the teeth, I'm using a combination of antique parchment with a little bit of golden sunset, but leaning a lot heavier into the antique parchment so it doesn't look like the base coat on this Baryonyx. Now let's knock out those eyes. The right eye is a combination of metallic gold and color shift green. And we're going to paint that itty bitty eye with an itty bitty toothpick. And the left eye is a combination of metallic light blue and antique parchment. And that'll give us a pale blue eye that is just disturbing enough to inspire certain psychotic narrators to dismember the Baryonyx and hide it underneath the floorboards, only to then go mad and reveal his crime to the inspectors who come to visit him because he still hears its beating heart. But I digress. While I was rambling about his blind eye, it looks like I've moved on to painting that collar, which I used burnt umber for. There's no fancy trick to painting the collar, just try not to slop any of that burnt umber on the rest of the Baryonyx. And once we finish up with that collar, we can move on to the prosthetic strap. And for that, I'm just going to use chestnut. Same thing applies here, just try not to be too sloppy. Once I'm done painting the strap, I'm going to use that same chestnut color to paint the top of the prosthetic arm, the part that goes around the stump. Now that that's done, we'll use a little bit of metallic sterling silver to paint the buckle on the collar. I'm also going to paint part of the joint that goes down to the prosthetic arm from the strap with chestnut, and that'll help it make it look like the strap actually continues all the way down to it. I don't like painting joints because they have a tendency to wear, so I'm going to seal that with super glue, and hopefully not glue the joint in place. Fingers crossed. Now I'm just going to sharpen up a toothpick as sharp as I can get it because that right eye still needs a pupil. Hold your breath. And now, because I don't see a Black Market Baryonyx having a pristine shiny metal arm, we're going to put a metallic black wash on it and grimy it up a bit. And with that done, I think that completes this Baryonyx. Well folks, that's the end of the video. Thanks for sticking around. If you enjoy my content, be sure to like and subscribe. If you'd like a chance to own whatever I made or painted in this video, be sure to check out my eBay and Etsy shops. And to see other projects that I've made, be sure to follow me on Instagram. I appreciate your support, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.